So welcome, kia ora koutou, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for Sam McIvor, who's the CEO of Beef and Lamb New Zealand. Welcome, Sam. I'll hand it over to you, and if you talk, and then when you've finished that, we'll just ask for questions through the chat function, and I'll kind of facilitate them, and we'll take it from there, if that's okay.
Sounds good. Great. I'm live, Sarah, by the looks of things. Mm-hmm. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for the opportunity to, I guess, firstly talk with you, but have a discussion today. Listen, I'm taking the view that we're using a Chatham House rules approach here today. So I know there's a bunch of you that work in companies, but there's a bunch of you that work in the, I guess, in the rural media. So if there's anything that particularly the rural media want to pick up with me afterwards, then we can have a direct conversation about that. But that's what I'm working on today. Listen, what I thought I would do is really start off and perhaps spend 10 or 15 minutes talking through some of what we see are the strategic issues sitting in front of us at the moment. And I thought a good way to do that would be to run you through some of Beef and Lamb New Zealand's strategy, because I think that provides a really nice framework to raise some of those key issues to the surface. And then, listen, we'll have plenty of time for questions. And for me, ask anything you like. I'm very happy to comment on anything. So to set a bit of context, our strategy, our vision is for profitable farmers, thriving farming communities valued by all New Zealanders. And I think immediately as we look at this vision, it raises three of the key issues that we're dealing with at the moment. The first one around profitable farmers, you know, it's pretty obvious, but that sits very clearly within our object as Beef and Lamb New Zealand, that we're here to add to the profitability of our farmers. A second part of that vision is thriving farming communities. And this is an issue that's, I think, just raised in prominence over the last few years. As we went through our strategic planning process, we were quite surprised by, I guess, the depth of feeling that there was from farmers around their rural communities, and some of the concern that their communities we're starting to fall to bits, and whether that was around rural infrastructure, whether that was around schools or health, whether it was around actually that some farmers were being pitted against each other in rural communities around such things as environmental issues and resource availability. And then the third aspect is this valued by all New Zealanders. And I guess I would describe that as code for pride, really. And what we've seen over the last few years, and particularly I think widespread in the pastoral sector, is farmers feeling that they've lost some of their prominence or their pride or their stature within New Zealand society. And in my discussions with farmers is that, you know, part of what they do is they love what they do as a job. They love the animals, the pastures, the ability to run their own business. But there is a greater good that they consider that they provide in terms of being farmers. And this is this aspect of adding value to New Zealand or being part of New Zealand's success. And I guess when that's been challenged over the last few years, that has been very, very hard to take for farmers. And so in my conversations with them, that is one of the really big issues for them. If we talk about our purpose as an organisation, insights and actions driving tangible impact for farmers, insight has become a pretty much an overused word. But given that you're a bunch of people that are interested in words, I'll give you what I describe as, I guess, my interpretation of the word and the way that we use the word in our business. And insights for us is a deep understanding of the people or the issues. And so for us, when we're making strategic decisions, when we're entering into issues, when we're looking to do work on behalf of farmers, we really want to start with a deep understanding of the people and the issues. And for us, that sets a foundation for everything we do beyond that. I guess the second aspect of that purpose is, listen, you can have all the insight in the world, but if you don't do anything with it, then it's a bit pointless. So for us, there is that real aspect, there is that real aspect around taking action on things. And I'll sort of allude to some of the things that we've done later, but we're trying to, as a business, be more agile and quicker on the action that we take around emerging issues. And then the third aspect is having a tangible impact for farmers. And again, you people been in the communications sort of game, it's all about measuring the impact and knowing that actually what you're doing is working, right? And so really we try to assess the tangible impact in two ways. One is we regularly talk to farmers about how they feel about the industry, how they feel about us, and what they feel the priorities are and what we're doing, how we're doing against those. But also what we try to do is put some real measurement around the impact that we're having. So that's sort of facts and figures and analysis. So that sets a bit of an overview for our strategy. And we've got 5 priorities that sit there. And I'm really going to talk about the first 4 today and run through, I think, about sort of 16 key activities that we're focused on, so that hopefully surface again some of those key issues. With a business like ours, farmers always have lots of issues that come across our desk. And sometimes as an industry, good organisation, you feel sort of a real need that you've got to respond to all of them. But in terms of us being effective and in terms of us having a real impact, then one of the key challenges we have is really around prioritising what we do. So to unlocking market potential. And I guess Taste Pure Nature is really the masthead of the organisation and almost the industry here in terms of how we position ourselves. So Taste Pure Nature is our origin brand. And our origin brand is being developed and it's a true industry partnership that I would describe it in terms of its creation, in that it was around farmers telling their story. We work with processors, we work with other stakeholders in the industry and in terms of government. So it was very much a co-designed process to get to that. In terms of where Taste Pure Nature sits at the moment, it's been launched in 2 key priority markets globally, and that's the US and predominantly in California in the first instance, and then in China. And I guess it's been really interesting just over probably the last 6 months to see how we've been able to pivot with Taste Pure Nature and how that's changed. If you look into the marketplace, you know, we've seen a massive shift, just like we have in New Zealand, from food service into retail, and also aligned with retail with online. And so what we've been able to do with Taste Pure Nature is work with our partners to pivot in both of those areas. So a strong focus on retail. And secondly, we have launched a couple of online initiatives, and one particularly recently with Alliance, which is about to launch in China. The other aspect too that we've seen is that China is a good example. There's been a real pivot to natural products and sort of a relationship really between COVID, the health of the individual and their ability to deal with COVID. And that's drawn, particularly in China, a real emphasis on red meat. The other thing has really been around, I guess, the safety of products and people understanding traceability and what's going on in the food chain. And again, because of our attributes around New Zealand, which is natural, it's grass-fed, it's hormone-free, it's with strong phytosanitary and food safety standards, which are unequaled around the world, that's sort of in a very, very strong position in all of those markets. But what we have seen is really, I think our companies have pivoted quite well. And this sort of leads on to the second one to a certain degree, which is the global trade environment. One of our real emphases at Beef and Lamb New Zealand and as a sector has been continuing to open more markets to trade and to remove non-tariff barriers. And at this present time, we export to about 120 countries around the world. And that diversity of markets has been a real strength for the industry. So a really strong emphasis on China initially, in that we had 50% of our products going into China. But because of those other markets, those companies have been able to quickly pivot to other markets and other destinations and other food chains as well. So I think that the industry has done that very, very successfully. But what we see now is that we are entering a really uncertain global trade environment. That's firstly brought about by particularly what the US was doing with their free trade agreement or non-free trade agreement approach, as we might describe it. But secondly now is what we're seeing, I guess, disruption of supply chains. I think I heard at one point there was 500,000 containers around the world that were sitting in the wrong position. And so all of a sudden your distribution chains be quite challenging. At the same time, we're seeing a hint of governments starting to look at how they protect their own industry and how they invest in their own industry. And I think we've seen that in New Zealand, haven't we? You know, the first big, large government investment has really been around triaging around employment in New Zealand and trying to boost what's happening locally. Now, not all of the employment that is going to be created is going to be around export. A lot of it is going to be around keeping the local economy wheels driving. So we see that, you know, a lot of uncertainty in global trade, potentially more protectionism. The WTO has been under a lot of pressure. And so there's a real aspect here that we have to be nimble. We absolutely have to gather really good intelligence on a global trade basis, and we need to push really hard for continued open trade. No other country is so exposed to trade as is New Zealand. And for your purposes, you know, we export 85% of our beef, 93% of our lamb, so we really need those international markets to continue to work. Sort of an adjunct to those international markets is really what happens with Brexit and with FTAs, particularly in Europe with our European FTA and with the EU FTA that might, the UK FTA that might follow that. You know, there's a lot of uncertainty around that, but it's just those things that we need to continue to push. Environment is something that touches every part of our business. And so we do have Haywoka Tools now and the climate change initiative there, which is a partnership with government. We have a window of opportunity to deliver on the promises that we did, which is measurement at the farm gate and then a farm gate pricing mechanism. And so that is continuing on with pace. I think it's been really interesting for me to observe media over the last 6 or 8 weeks when we've been in this COVID, I guess, sort of response, is that the only thing that I think hasn't really gone away is climate change. And that has continued to bubble as an issue in media, regardless of the fact that actually we've just been focused on trying to survive as healthy people and trying to get through it. So for me, that continues to be a significant issue for us as a sector and globally. Water is a second big issue for us. And I guess what we've seen is government policy has continued to carry on, or policy creation has continued to carry on through the COVID response. For us at the moment, getting certainty around that water policy and getting something that's fit for purpose for our sector that will achieve water quality outcomes, but will achieve it in a pragmatic and practical way. And I guess we use the old adage that it's hard to be green when you're in the red. And so this is yes, we absolutely want to progress on that. We want certainty on that, but we have to do it in a way that actually keeps our economy going at the same time. The same with biodiversity policy as well, which has given us some real concern. So we're continuing to advocate on behalf of farmers to get those right, but at the same time we recognise that the future is about farming within an acceptable environmental footprint. And I guess fitting all of those things together is that whether it's Haywoka Tools, whether it's water policy, whether it's biodiversity policy, is that we will see farm planning or environmental farm plan has been a very bedrock of how we deliver those on farm, how we integrate them, and how we show progress as a sector. And so we're putting a lot of emphasis into that at the moment. If I look at the economic recovery and some of the things that we really need from government, our water and our soil infrastructure in terms of our understanding and in terms of how that's applied nationally is still not good enough. And so through this COVID recovery thing, certainly that's something we'd like to see as an industry, a strong focus on understanding better our water resources, better understanding our infrastructure that sits around that, and then how we utilise that water within an acceptable environmental footprint. Personally, I have a bit of an obsession around soil as well, in that, soil and water is the really foundation of our biological economy, along with the vegetation that sort of grows on top of that. And at this stage, I couldn't quote the figure, but we're still well short of understanding our soil infrastructure on a national basis, therefore our ability to best utilise it. So environment is massive for us. If we talk about supporting farming excellence, the big challenge here is that we need to continue to drive productivity, but how do we do that within an acceptable environmental footprint? And let me give a very simple example there. We know that our greenhouse gas emissions, there is a direct relationship between intake of feed for whether it's cattle or sheep and greenhouse gas emissions. And so one of the real challenges is how do we unlock that relationship or dislocate that relationship, still continue to drive volume out of our businesses, but do that in a way that doesn't compromise any of the environmental indicators that we have. If we look globally, there is still a tremendous opportunity for us around both volume and value. If we talk about volume, world protein demand is forecast to double by 2050. So obviously that leaves a really good opportunity for an industry who is very good at providing healthy, natural products with an acceptable environmental footprint. So there's quite a bit of focus here. If we talk about people, if we look widely across our sector, and I'll take quite a wide view here where we look at horticulture and we look at dairy and we talk about meat processing, they have really pressing issues around what traditionally has been delivered through immigration. But then we have this picture of high unemployment in New Zealand at the moment. And so what we need is really a joined up, cross-sector approach, a joined up approach with government to ensure that we have a chain of people coming into the sector who firstly are attracted, appropriately trained, and then appropriately supported in their roles to be successful in the sector. I guess what we've seen through COVID too is that all of us are doing this stuff, right? Where we used to do face-to-face, we're now doing so much more electronically, and that's very much been the case with our organisation and industry. Probably 40% of our work is done face-to-face with farmers, and we've had to pivot quite quickly to do a lot more electronically. Now, we were prepared for that, and we've been starting to go down that path, but we've had to really put that on steroids over the last few months. And there's been some really tremendous outcomes out of it, in that we've connected with a whole lot of people who we would have never have connected with in the past. And so that's been really valuable. And so if we look into the future, there's no doubt there's going to be a hybrid of face-to-face and electronic means used a lot more. Just to give you an example, for a lot of our face-to-face activities, farmers might have to travel for an hour or an hour and a half to get to those. And so, if you're time poor, you have a family that you have other commitments to, you've got a farm business you're running, and you've got community aspects that you like to contribute to, farmers are no different from us in terms of being time poor. So the ability of using technology to connect better is going to be a really valuable tool. But underline that, we still have within rural communities poor internet infrastructure and poor connectivity that I think still stops information flows, still stops connection of communities, and still stops, I guess, the way that we can use technology to do better business. So that's certainly something we're focused on we've been offered, I think, a really good opportunity here, and we'll be pushing together with other industries, because this is a pretty joint view across industry to improve that. Then I guess the last bit is biosecurity and traceability. So that's what COVID-19 has all been about, is biosecurity and traceability, right? So as an industry, at the same time, we're massively exposed to that. We have a major program, or two major investments going on at the moment in TB, eradicating TB and eradicating M. bovis. And so as we look at what we've been through with COVID, we think there's a tremendous ability to learn from COVID, put alongside the learnings that we were getting through TB, through traceability and M. bovis, and work out actually how can we build the best biosecurity traceability system in the world, because we've just seen how exposed we are to the movement or the non-movement of people, right? And we knew that we were going to get something like COVID. It's been predicted for years as that animal-people relationship would drive these sort of events happening globally, and they will continue to happen in the future, and we've seen that we're very exposed to them. Government and public engagement. I guess one of the key things that we're emphasising really at the moment is that if we talk about economic recovery, then it is going to be needs to be an export-led recovery. There's no doubt that we can do things that are infrastructure-based in New Zealand, and we do need to improve a lot of that infrastructure. But absolutely, at the end of the day, foreign exchange is really, really important to what we do. And we're a small country with 5 million people. So if you talk about our ability to earn as a country and our ability to grow wealth and GDP and all of those good things that we talk about, just supplying 5 million New Zealanders is not going to cut the mustard. So absolutely, as a sector, we're focused on how can we be very clear with the government around what we see as actually an export-led recovery. And that comes back to us doing the thinking, and it comes back to us working in partnership with government. And so for us, in the first instance, MIA, the Meat Industry Association, and us are working on what that means for the red meat sector. But beyond that, it's working with groups like the Farming Leaders Group to bring a collective view that we can take to government. We are an election year, so part of our focus at the moment is aside from COVID, is what do we need from government, and what do we want to do jointly with government for the long-term success of our industry. Industry positioning is another key one. And I guess what we've alluded to and what some of our data has told us, and we've done some pretty deep research around this, is that we have been losing some of our, I guess, connectivity and relationship with urban New Zealand. And it's something that we need to do better at. What has some of our research told us is that in general, urban New Zealanders understand a lot less about the sector than they used to. Secondly, that they're very willing to connect with the sector. And thirdly, that they really want to hear from farmers. And so that's part of what we're starting to build across the sector, is how can we get that engagement. If we talk about how the industry has been seen through COVID, then there's no doubt in my mind that industry has been seen in a different light. And I think there's a couple of things that I've observed. I think that as an essential service, which is what the primary sector in essence has become, I think the primary sector has done a great job around putting its head down and getting on with it and doing the job responsibly and showing leadership. Secondly, I think in general, I think we've reached out quite well to urban New Zealanders and shown a bit of empathy and a bit of care, which I think is exactly what was required. Because let's face it, the rural sector has come through this a lot better than a lot of the urban sector will do, particularly those small businesses within urban New Zealand. So this is a real opportunity where our profile has been raised, our recognition has been raised, and we need to make every post a winner. And really, as part of that, telling the farmer story, we've got involved in this year at a foundation level in things like Open Farm New Zealand. We just see there's a tremendous opportunity now that farmers have really, I guess, become more savvy, particularly on I guess, social media and forums like this over the last 3 or 4 months to really up that on steroids. So listen, I will stop there as a bit of a quick and nasty overview and open it up to questions. And Rowena Hume, I think, is on the call as well. Rowena is, I suppose, we act as a pretty strong partnership in terms of looking inwards and looking outwards in the organisation. So, Ro, if you want to drop in at any point too, I'll welcome that.
Great, thanks very much, Sam. Maybe while everyone gets busy on their keyboards popping some questions in, I could kick the ball off. I was just thinking about when you were talking about the greenhouse gas things in your Haywoka Tools. In the dairy industry, Fonterra have gone out and said, they're going to support farmers to do those greenhouse gas calculations underneath their farm environment planning through the TRK. I'm just wondering, are you working with meat industry, meat companies to do similar, or what's sort of the strategy within the sheep and beef industry for getting a head start on getting farmers those numbers and getting some understanding of where they need to place themselves?
Yeah, listen, if we look across the sector, for us, I mean, dairy farmers are a big part of our businesses, right, as well, right? So they provide 40% of our beef levies. So they're an important stakeholder for us. If we look across the industry, we have a lot of farmers that have, I guess, what I'd describe as multi-enterprises, right? So whether, often dairy and sheep and beef are closely integrated, but we see dairy and sheep and beef closely integrated with arable, for example. We see increasingly a lot of people having, they might have a horticulture unit that's connected with their farming business. So for us, I guess we try to look at it through a farmer lens and say, what is it that's easiest for the farmer to do? And so for us, yep, we'll be creating simple tools, but we'll be looking to do that in partnership with the dairy industry, with the arable industry as well, so that hopefully farmers only need to do things once. But we see this, this simple calculator as a key part of our, I suppose, what we describe as our integrated farm environment plan too. And that integrated farm environment plan does have your climate change, it does have your water, it does have your biodiversity, and it does have your soils. And in that regard, it's a one-stop shop for farmers that can allow them to integrate all of those things, but meet, I guess, legislative requirements at the same time as meeting a social license requirement, at the same time as meeting their market requirements as well. But thinking about what do farmers need at the moment, and really we think they need a pretty basic tool to just know where they are. So they've got a starting point for where they need to go in the future.
Yeah. Sam, could I just jump in there, just in terms of those tools as well? Like, we're trying to figure out at the moment, there's lots of different tools getting developed, and what we're trying to think through at the moment is kind of like, what are those various different tools deliver, and then also what's going to come out of Haywoka Tools, because we don't want to which is going to be developing quite quickly a way for farmers to measure their emissions as well. So we're just trying to think through that at the moment, and make sure that we kind of set up something that puts farmers on the right track. And for our farmers, the big thing that they want, because a lot of the tools that have been developed so far are really just focused on the emissions, but sequestration, on-farm sequestration, is a really big part of sheep and beef farms in particular. They've got a lot of biodiversity there, and we want to be able to have a tool that they can really accurately measure their net position. So yeah, so we're sort of on that journey at the moment, trying to figure out what's Haywoka, what's its time frame, and what's it going to deliver, and then what do we need, what's a good kind of starting mechanism that's kind of simple that farmers could use, but that includes that sequestration piece. And just another bit of work that we're working on at the moment, we've actually got research happening that should come out hopefully in the next month. We're trying to calculate the net carbon sequestration, net carbon position of the sector. So what's our total emissions? And then we've got research that was done about a year ago on how much biodiversity is on our sheep and beef farms, and we've got a university trying to come up with a net position for the sector, which will also feed into Haywoka, because a big thing for us through the Haywoka process is getting recognition of the native vegetation native forest that's already on our farms.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Thank you, Rowena.
We've got a goal of carbon neutral by 2050. So that's sort of set out in our environmental strategy, and that's what we're aiming to. So it's about putting the tools behind that.
Great. Cool. And now there's a question: how much of a concern is increasing forestry conversion to sheep and beef farms, and do you have a strategy to address this?
Yeah. Good question. Yes, it is a concern, but listen, we're trying to take an objective view of this, right? So ultimately, people have a choice around selling their farm and who they sell to, and an important part for farmers is as they exit their businesses, they've worked for 30, 40, 50 years, sometimes building wealth. And so their ability to attract the best price when they exit their business is a really important part. I think our concern is really where government legislation distorts market signals. And I guess that's one of our concerns at the moment, is that we see that government legislation around carbon offsets is really driving, I guess what I would say is distortion of the market in terms of what land should be used for, and locking up land for something for the long term that is not necessarily going to serve New Zealand well. If we talk about conversion into forestry, leaving aside those that are forestry investors and want to build a wood business for the future or whatever that might be, the carbon offset one we think is really about buying time for almost a 2030 sort of targeted away, or a 2050 target, and getting runs on the board. But in terms of how that will serve New Zealand in the long term, it doesn't really serve New Zealand in terms of growing wealth, a good utilisation of land. The other thing we're obviously concerned about is just rural communities and how it affects rural communities. We've done quite a bit of independent research around the impact of forestry for regional employment versus, for example, red meat production or other industries. And we see there's quite a risk around the infrastructure and the ongoing vibrancy of rural communities here. But it is trying to be objective about it, and it's really around distorted policy-related issues as opposed to the market truly operating. Ro, do you want to add anything in there?
Yeah, I'd just say that I think that in terms of that question of strategy to address it, I guess our long-term strategy is that we've got a short-term objective at the moment. There's the ETS reform bill that's going through that's going to raise the carbon price. And our immediate objective is to ensure that as they raise that carbon price, there's a mechanism in there that can allow the government to restrict forestry offsets if it identifies that there is too much happening and that's impacting on regional communities. So we're wanting to ensure there's mechanisms in place to prevent large-scale conversion happening on a large scale in regions. And then long-term, I guess our strategy is around just building that understanding, building a conversation around the trade-off between meeting your fossil fuel emissions through planting trees. What do you want? Do you want sort of profitable landscapes and productive landscapes? Or do you want to place trees on those so that you can offset your fossil fuel emissions but not actually reduce your fossil fuel emissions? Because actually that's what the ETS and carbon prices are aimed at doing. They're aimed at reducing emissions. But our view is that in the interim, as the carbon price rises, it's not going to lead to reductions in emissions until it gets to about $70. And in that interim period, just a lot of forestry will happen. So we're really wanting to, our long-term strategy, I guess, is about raising those questions and getting that conversation going, because we don't think that at the moment people really understand what the impacts of raising the carbon prices on those regional places.
I think just to add to that too, is that at the end of the day, we've seen land use change in the past around profitability of land use, right? So we have a very strong focus as a sector around our farmers being very profitable at meat production, right? And growing value that way. But at the same time, understanding that in the future, farmers are going to be farming a mosaic of activities on their landscape. And so we do have farmers that are really interested in looking at, the 10 hectares of really fertile flats that they have and saying, well, actually, is a horticultural use the best use here, and could I do something with my community? For some of them, absolutely, forestry is a great succession tool and a great income tool that has a time span. At the same time, we see, ecotourism or biodiversity services as another string to farmers' bows. So I guess as a business, I'm absolutely jealous and love red meat production, but I'm also we're also as a business having an open mind to where do our farmers want to go and what are the opportunities for farmers and how do these things coexist. And so as opposed to blanket forestry taking out whole farms, let's look at parts of farms, and it's not necessarily just around radiata, maybe it's around other species, and sometimes it's around native species, right? So just having an open mind on how things can coexist and still have vibrant rural communities, but continue to grow our export value.
So that's sort of the right tree in the right place kind of
ethos. Yeah.
So how is the industry responding to the increasing availability of meat alternatives?
Yeah, listen, I talked about insight at the start, and probably 3 years ago now, we saw this starting to emerge as an issue. And I guess we decided that we would take an insight approach to it. And so we launched a global study, I would have literally been 3 years ago now, to really understand what was happening and to look at the scenarios of what it might mean for our sector. And two things. I go back before and I talked about the fact that global protein production needs to double by 2050, right? We as a sector can feed 24 million people on a good day based on sort of World Health Organization's recommendations for consuming meat. So for us, we're not quite going to meet that demand internationally over time. So I see the ability to coexist. But for us, it was really around actually how do we position ourselves in a global market and what is the story that we tell about ourselves. And so that very much fed into, I guess, Taste for Your Nature and reinforced that Taste for Your Nature was heading in the right direction. And that, we have a bunch of people that love meat and are going to eat meat forever, and nobody's going to tell them not to, right? But then we have a bunch of people who, live in a community where people are starting to sort of question their morals from eating meat. They sort of love eating meat, but then they're going, sort of my friends are sort of questioning whether I should be doing it, animal welfare, environment. And so for us, we see a real opportunity to position New Zealand as, I guess, as the ethical and guilt-free meat choice. Really in that, we are grass-fed, so it's a natural product. It's free range, and so any animal welfare issues that people have dealt with, antibiotic-free, hormone-free, so those things that they worry about in terms of industrial agriculture are catered for. New Zealand has a second-to-none sort of food safety record, and so in that regard, it's really around how we position New Zealand meat in a world that, yes, is going to eat less, but still wants to eat meat. I think really the concern that we have had, and this is something that we're still battling with, is that, a lot of the positioning of alternative proteins has been around, I guess, the negative attributes around natural or meat production as we see it around the world. And so again, for us, it's trying to differentiate ourselves from industrial meat production as such, which is where a lot of the concerns are coming. We do farm New Zealand in a way that is responsible to the environment, that does look after the biodiversity, that isn't cutting down rainforests, et cetera, et cetera. So we think we have a strong position there.
Yeah, thank you. Now, there's always been lots of jobs available in the agri sector, and lots of New Zealanders haven't taken up these opportunities. So Peter Burke wonders if you really think this will change in the COVID environment.
Yeah, it is really interesting, Peter. I think on New Zealand sheep and beef farms, we we're not a big employer on New Zealand sheep and beef farms, right? So we need about 1,500 people a year to come into our industry. Nonetheless, you know, we do find it challenging to get the right people with the right skills. You know, if we look wider as a red meat sector, you know, we employ 92,000 people directly or indirectly, and particularly our meat processors find it challenging. Listen, because of the way that immigration, I guess our borders have been locked, we don't have a choice but to address this issue, right? And so, Peter, I think we are going to have to find ways in which we attract people, that we truly train people, and we support people into careers in our sector. And I guess this is where I come back to things like rural infrastructure as such, right? And so for me, making a decision to take my family out of town into rural New Zealand to perhaps get into a job out there, there are lots of things that are really attractive. But then, will I have good health services? Will my kids have a good school? Will I have good internet connection, et cetera, et cetera? So I think there's both an aspect of rural infrastructure, but also, dare I say it, that supply chain of how we actually attract people, how we get them trained appropriately, and how we support them into the business. But I guess, you know, given that we think we're going to get to 10 to 12% unemployment, there is no doubt that there will be some desperation from people to open their eyes to other opportunities too. So I think to a certain degree there may well be a private, sort of almost a perfect storm, which we damn well have to take advantage of and use. But it's not going to be easy, Peter. I think it's not going to be easy, and it's going to have to be a coordinated effort across the sector, and we're seeing that, but also with the sector hand in hand with the government. And we are hearing good words out of MPI about how they want to approach it too.
Oh, that's great. Now, you were talking about the awareness and understanding of farming amongst urban Kiwis is perhaps lower than it's ever been before. What do you believe has caused this shift, and what can the farming industry collectively do to address it?
Yeah, I think, you know, you guys know this better than me, right? Is that we're third generation removed from having a connection with farm. We've had a strong immigration policy over the last however many years. We've got 1.6 million people based in Auckland. You know, all of those things together, it's very much understandable that people understand the rural sector less than they have historically. I think, to be honest too, is that as a sector, we probably didn't recognise that it was happening too. There was, you know, it was a slow sort of tide running out on knowledge and understanding, and we didn't fully recognise that. I guess the third aspect is that, you know, we've had a change in government, and we've had a change in government policy too, in terms of some of the policy that's been driven. Globally, we've had different issues being raised, and the global rhetoric has raised real issues around how we farm. So I think you put all of those things in combination, and it's understandable. And so for us, the first step was that we did some really in-depth research to understand how urban New Zealand felt about farming, what issues were the key ones for them, and actually how they wanted to engage. And I guess a couple of key things that came out of that is, one is that they did actually quite like farmers. You know, there was only 10% of New Zealanders that didn't like sheep and beef farmers. And I say jokingly, you know, if we look in our own families, there's probably 10% of our own families that don't really like us. So don't take it too hard, sheep and beef farmers. The second thing is that they do want to connect. And so it's providing those mechanisms whereby they can connect. And so that's why, as one example, we got involved in Open Farm New Zealand this year, because we think providing the opportunities for these people to come together is really important. I guess the third aspect is equipping farmers. And you know, as I alluded to before, just going through what we've been through over the last 6 or 8 weeks, use of social media, understanding of these sort of forums with farmers has grown. and there is a real desire too for farmers to tell their story, right? And so for us, we've got quite an emphasis on providing them with the tools. I think the other aspect too is, just growing farmers' understanding of urban New Zealanders and the fact that urban New Zealanders are actually people just like farmers are people. And urban New Zealanders just have the same issues, they're trying to get through the week, they're trying to pay their mortgage, they're trying to have a fulfilling job, they're trying to contribute in their communities, they're trying to make sure their kids get a good education. They're actually no different from you farmers. So understand what you're going through and have empathy for what rural, urban communities are going through as well. And I think too, the other aspect is, you want a social license. Well, you also need to understand the things that you need to do to have a social license, right? So you can't bemoan the fact that New Zealanders are getting on your case about the environment, but not want to do anything about the issues that are in the environment. So I think, that sort of sounds a bit harsh, but just educating our farmers to sort of look outside and see the other side as well. Ro, do you want to add anything else in there?
No, the only thing I just say is that Open Farm, I think, will be a great vehicle in the future for farmers to help, because the research showed that we did show that people that have been on a farm more recently were much more likely to have a positive view about farming because they know more about it, and that has been very much borne out by the research that was done by Open Farm. I don't know if people have seen it, but research was just released this week that they did with the Land and Water guys that really bore that out, is that of the 3,500 people that went on the farms, there was a really positive impact. And so what we really want to do, and what we want farmers to do, is if we want them to there to be more hosts this next year, because I think a few farmers were sitting on the fence to see how it would go, because it is quite hard for you to put yourself out there, and people were just a bit nervous. But I think hopefully that gives them the confidence that it can be a really positive experience. I went to one of them myself, and the guys that hosted were really pleased with how it went, but they were quite cautious as well about the number of people they had on their farm. So we really want to kind of grow that and support farmers to be doing that, and then supporting farmers in the way that they kind of communicate with the public around their concerns that they have to build that sort of social license.
Thanks. The other thing I was thinking was curriculum resources have been developed for, I'm sure, for primary schools. Is that by beef and lamb or by the dairy industry? And what's your sort of strategy around upskilling kids and where their food comes from, and sort of starting at that end of the engagement piece? Yeah,
it's a really good question. We've primary industry PICA. What's the C in PICA stand for? Somebody will know what the C is. Capability aligned. Sorry, I'm an investor in it, so I should know, right? So part of that has been the role of, I guess, PICA, which is drawing together industries around common goals, and so that's been part of the investment in there. It's been a really challenging situation for us, right? Because I guess there are two aspects here, isn't there? One is around social license and recognition of the sector. The second is that we're trying to attract people to come into our sector, right? And so I think at times one of the issues we've had is those sort of two issues have merged together into one, and we've been trying to do those with one investment. So really where we've come to, I guess, in terms of recruitment for the industry is that, listen, with limited resources, we probably need to be focusing more at when people are making those career decisions. And so that's those sort of year 12 and 13 and beyond that. So strong emphasis there for recruitment. If we talk about growing the awareness of our industry and, I guess, the social license and the perception, yep, we know that education institutions, we know that teachers are influential. We know that what kids learn at school is influential. We know that carries that with them. So that's an important aspect as well. And I think for us, we always have limited resources, and it's figuring out where do we allocate those scarce resources. One of the things that we've said to MPI is that, listen, we're really happy to work at that recruitment end, year 12, 13 and beyond, and make sure the training's right for the people that we want to bring into our businesses. maybe that's an MPI role to work in our primary schools and up to that, year 10 to 11 area to really grow that awareness and reputation. But we can support it. But it's really hard for us to work through that whole education chain and be effective and resource it.
Yeah, exactly. There's always lots of ways to spend your money, aren't there? Well, thank you very much, Sam. I think that's the end of the questions, but I'd just like to thank both you and Rowena for your time and for putting together this presentation and sort of giving us some background. I'm sure there'll be other questions come out of it, and I guess people can contact you and if they've got further questions. So thanks very much for your time.
Yep.